Good morning, my friends. Welcome once again into Lent. This is our fourth Lenten season together. Can you believe it? We've worked our way around to year A, Lent 1 again. It's pretty wild to think about where we were the first time we experienced this lectionary set of readings together. It was March 1st, 2020. We were cautiously optimistic that COVID would not develop into anything, really, even though the East Coast was already starting to close up. We would meet in person for one more week after this, before we would quickly shift into online worship and sheltering in place. It was before we even entered into the collective trauma of lengthy separation and pandemic and all of the things that came out through that. And funnily enough, here we are in Lent in year A, and we're starting out apart from one another. You would probably never know it from my sunny surroundings right now in my friend's home here in Santa Barbara. But the 2-night birthday trip that I was supposed to have was extended due to all of the flood warnings and, all of the storms that are part of the same sister system that have blanketed North Fork and really, let's be real, most of California with snow. And while in 2020 we weren't fully aware yet of the Lenten wilderness that we would be entering, this year we're starting out Lent already feeling it. The wilderness of washed out roads and snow shovels and generators and electricity outages and spotty internet connections, of wondering how much longer this storm's going to last, and are we going to have enough to get through? And being stuck in Santa Barbara. I mean, it's really hard for me to complain about it, right? But this is something that we have been doing all winter long. Big storms that have surpassed all expectations of what a winter storm might be in our area. And we've been doing this all summer with our record highs, those 100 and whatever, 15 degree heat days, 112, 100 and whatever. It just kept getting higher and higher. Are we just people who don't leave the Lenten wilderness now? Liturgically, it might be the first week of Lent, but physically and geographically and meteorologically, that is a word, isn't it? Have we ever come out of it in all of those ways? And all of this is to say, the world has changed. We've changed. And there is no chance that I could ever recycle my sermons from our last go-round of this particular liturgical cycle, as tempted as I may be. Tempted. Yeah, that sounds familiar, right? As you heard in both of the readings this morning, graciously offered by my dear friends Ben and Aurora. Temptation is kind of the word of the day. In Genesis, the serpent tempts those first humans to snack from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And in Matthew, Jesus is tempted by the devil. In Lent, we're tempted by chocolate and recycling old sermons. What can I say? But what is temptation, really? Why, thematically, does it show up in such force on the first Sunday in Lent? I mean, couldn't we just be eased in? Isn't it already hard enough? Jeez. Temptation at its most basic level is the desire to do something that we know is a bad idea. But is temptation itself inherently bad? I want to explore that a little bit, especially since we've just entered into Lent. Ash Wednesday and the intentions that we've set for this season are still fresh on our minds. Often something that we do with these Lenten disciplines is to give something up, right? And so I'm going to briefly talk about relationship to food and drink. I want to offer that if this is something that is beyond temptation and is more of a trigger or might be harmful to any sort of recovery, please feel free to skip ahead And keep skipping if it feels uncomfortable, or just find a different way to meditate today that is not going to be harmful or undo any of the beautiful, brave, amazing work that you're doing. This is a time that many people treat like New Year's resolutions round 2, right? It's like a kickstart to a weight loss plan, or giving up sweets or martinis or french fries. And those things are not ignoble tasks. I mean, those are big things. As long as the intention isn't superficial, as, like a 40-day cleanse. And as long as our giving up of those things doesn't make things harder for the people around us. Ideally, if we were going to go that giving up route to get through Lent, it'll be something that every time we go to reach for it, it'll remind us of this wilderness time and keep our thoughts coming back to our relationship with God. So say if it was my morning coffee, which coincidentally, that's not what I gave up. This phone right now is actually perched on top of my coffee cup in a makeshift tripod situation. But if it was my morning cup of coffee that I've given up, then whenever I go to pour those beans into the coffee grinder and make a pot of coffee in the morning, I will be pulled out of the everyday ordinary routine that would be, and back into Lent as I put that coffee filter back and instead choose like a cup of tea, water, milk. What do you even do? A fast like this is not an opportunity for me to detox from caffeine. That's not what the point of this would be. That might happen. It probably would happen. But instead, it's clearing a space that makes room for a transformative spiritual journey in and through this season of deep reflection and spiritual hunger. However, if I'm already a tea drinker, will it be tempted if I give up my cup of coffee? Temptation is necessary in this season and in any season, I would say. God didn't place the tree of knowledge of good and evil in a gated and guarded location away from the view of those first 2 humans in the Garden of Eden. Instead, it was placed in the middle. Temptation City, it's just right there. But here's the difference between temptation and a triggering situation, because again, as we talk about this, I don't want anybody to feel like they are being led into something that will get something started that they are not meant to be in. Temptation can strengthen us. Triggers will harm us. And so I hope that no one's putting themselves or others around them into a dangerous situation that will lead to real harm. And if this is happening, I am available to talk it through and resource you and help you to get through that. But temptation, that's leaving the coffee pot out, even though it won't be touched for the rest of the Lenten season. And choosing tea or water or milk or kombucha or whatever it is that doesn't quite light up your brain in the same way that whatever the thing is that you would be tempted by. So why not put the coffee pot away if we're not using it? Why not hide the temptation for ourselves and insulate ourselves from the temptation? This makes me think of banned books. And I think about I think about it in this term of the danger of removing all temptation completely from our lives. I think the thought process from banning books is that if our young people are not exposed to ideas in books, they'll never think about them or try them. Have you ever met young people? I don't know. So I'm not sure. I think that's what the idea of banning books is. But what happens if we never have the opportunity to choose to say yes or no and to practice that kind of choice? If we haven't learned to flex that muscle of discernment when the concepts show up in the wild, we won't have had the practice built up to know when to choose yes or no. On the surface, something like banning books might seem like a faithful insulation from evil, but God never intended for us to live apart from the world. God sent Jesus to be with humanity. He didn't seclude himself on a hilltop, and there was opportunity for that. Remember the transfiguration story from last week when Peter immediately offered to build some dwelling places way up there on that hill so that he and Elijah and Moses, Jesus being he, and Elijah and Moses would never have to leave. They could just stay right there up on that mountaintop. But that wasn't the goal. Jesus continued back down the hill to be with the people, and not just some people, but all of them. In fact, in our gospel story today, when Jesus goes into the wilderness, he's completely removed from people, food, drink, old sermons to recycle, and every other reminder of temptation. But that's when the temptation hits him the hardest, when he's out of community and away from people in all of their beautiful, flawed, tempting goodness, right? Clearly, limiting our influences and the places that we go and the people we see, the books on our shelves, and retreating into whatever that wilderness, that aloneness, that separation from society, that's not the way to go. Jesus returned from the temptations to perform on command. It wasn't to feed himself. It was to perform immediately on command and transform some, rocks into bread, and that and the temptations of power and influence. He returned from that, was cared for by angels, was immediately brought into community, right? The angels were there and ministered to him, and then he went right back into the middle of a peoply landscape with all of its opportunities to show off, to abuse power, to ruin relationships. I mean, they're everywhere. Because that's where his presence was most needed. That's where our presence is most needed. Temptation is a spiritual discipline. And Lent, if we follow a giving up fast, then we're practicing saying no when the things that we know aren't good for us actually just pop up in the wild. Alternatively, if we are following a practice of taking on, which I know many of us have been doing for the last several years, like taking on more prayer time, or taking on an extra 10-minute walk in nature, or calling loved ones with more regularity, or, using all new sermon material. But in doing that, we're practicing saying yes to the things that are wonderful and generative and that feel good and that are good for community and relationship and spiritual guidance and depth and all of that. But we don't always make time for those. Temptation is there to remind us that our yeses and our nos have power. That power to build or to fracture relationships, community, health. When we're immersed in the world and really paying attention, temptation is all around us, offering us to choose to move closer into relationship to the divine and one another, or to move further apart. We won't recognize the difference if we don't learn to discern in those everyday brushes with it. Furthermore, it strengthens us. And I'm not saying let's all deep dive into temptation, even though it would be really fun to just take a quick trip real quick to I just said quick 3 times, whatever, it's fine, to Las Vegas or whatever. But, we're not supposed to take a deep dive into all those temptations, but this is a call to sit with it and be around it, not necessarily to be led into it. However, the more we're able to recognize and choose not to be led into temptation, the better equipped we are for helping others through and out of temptations as they arise. We build stronger, healthier community that way. We are never having to navigate those things alone. These Lenten temptations give us practice so that when we are presented with a temptation to unfairly exercise our power over others or to do things that will wreck our relationships, we can choose love and community and relationship and God again and again and again. And so on this very cold, snowy first day in Lent, I offer to you the permission to stop thinking about temptation as something to always avoid, but instead to embrace its inevitable presence in our lives as a spiritual tool toward discernment and wisdom. And with God's help, we will get there. Amen.